Hello, my mother thanks you for that introduction. A slight payback for the education expense. Hi, everybody. Who's thinking about lunch? Yeah. Good. Perfect topic, then. I'm thinking about lunch, too, but I think about lunch all the time. Why am I here to talk about lunches today? Well, Laura Fitton is a very smart person, and she thought that the solution that we put in place to solve school lunches was a bold idea and was worthy of the bold stage. I hope you'll agree. We think what we've done is pretty cool. And the reason we think it's cool is that we have tried to answer a different question in solving the school lunch problem. But before I tell you what question we're trying to answer, let's just agree on what the problem is. This is the problem. This is a typical school lunch. It's an actual school lunch that I downloaded from a website where kids can upload their school lunches. And it's certainly not the nicest looking lunch you can find on that website, but it's also not the worst lunch you can find. And in fact, it's representative. It's a fish cake, it's some very dead vegetables. The little blurt on the left-hand side is tartar sauce, that's peaches and sugar syrup, and of course, chocolate milk. That's the problem. Nobody's happy with the quality of lunches today on a styrofoam tray. That doesn't, even if you're really hungry right now, right? Does anybody think that looks appealing? Right, no. So that's the problem. But before I tell you the solution we've come up with and ask you if you think it's a bold approach, let's agree on how we see the problem. And the way to answer that question is to ask ourselves, how did we get to that lunch? How did we get there? It's a pretty interesting answer if you don't know anything about the history of school lunches. I'm going to tell you. In the late 19th century in the United States, we were still largely a rural economy, and in the Northeast, people went home for lunch, and they had big hot meals in the middle of the day, and they had a cold supper or a sandwich in the evening, not the way we do it now. And when the Industrial Revolution took hold in places like Maine and New Hampshire, and the textile factories sprang up, the people running factories didn't like the farm girls that they'd hired to staff the factory going home for an hour or two in the middle of the day. That wasn't very productive. So they had the brilliant idea to have a meal hosted at the factory. And that changed the productivity dynamic of the factories. And the Boston and New York public school systems thought that was a genius idea because they could cram more education in the day if they provided lunch on site. That's where school lunches came from. And in just after the Great Depression, Harry Truman thought that the kind thing to do, given the sad economic state for a lot of American families, was to create the National School Lunch Program, which added to that expectation with federal subsidies. So now we have 32 million children in the United States that are involved somehow in the National School Lunch Program. And it's a massive undertaking, so massive now that most public schools don't try to manage this by themselves. And we've had this explosion of companies like Sodexo, Aramark, Chartwell Compass Group, who collectively make $42 billion a year serving lunches to schools and to hospitals. But this is what's happening to school lunches today. If you don't have kids, if you've been completely deaf to the conversation in the mass media today, nobody's happy with the quality of school lunches, notwithstanding a lot of effort from people like Michelle Obama and Jamie Oliver. And what are some of the problems with lunches today? One is we have way too much sugar and salt and fat in these meals, partly because to make the industrialized production of food feasible from companies like Sodexo, we put a lot of salt and sugar as preservatives in the food. This is 57 tons of sugar, and that's the amount that children in the LA County School District consume in 1 week from chocolate milk, and it works out to something like 24 sugar packets per student. Yeah, pretty disgusting. This, anybody know what this is? Pink slime, yes, points for you. Yes. Another trivia question, National School Lunch Program is administered by which cabinet level organization in the United States? Health and Human Services, no. Education, no. Any more guesses? Department of Agriculture. It's the Department of Agriculture that administers the school lunch program, and one of the funny things that happens is that because they subsidize farmers to produce food that the market doesn't want, There's a lot of leftover food. So what do? We give it to kids. But it's leftover. Nobody wants it because it's poor quality, including this thing that's called finely textured beef, but is really cartilage and lye and a few other things. Another problem we have with lunches, we really want kids to eat fruit and vegetables. It's very expensive to provide fresh fruit and fresh vegetables through industrial solutions like Aramark. If we don't teach the kids to want them, they get thrown away. And then the government gets involved in some very delusional thinking. What is the thinking that is represented by this ketchup? Yes, that ketchup is a vegetable, even though the second most prominent ingredient in ketchup is sugar. Thank you very much. Okay, the last problem we have is, for reasons we don't yet understand as a society, in the last 5 years, allergies in children have exploded by more than 50%. So much so that now about 2 children in every classroom in America have a food allergy that's serious enough to warrant some attention. Besides that, we're also getting, finally, culturally, a little bit more sensitive to very legitimate dietary alternative lifestyles like gluten-free, vegetarianism, and kosher. And what that means is that it's almost impossible for any kind of on-site lunch program, even with 2 or 3 choices a day, to meet the needs of an entire community of students. Right? So we got a lot of problems with the solution that we've created. So the way we've approached this problem is to ask a different question. And it touches on something that some people call the unknown knowns, or the knowledge that doesn't know itself. And that's a phrase that was more recently popularized by none other than Donald Rumsfeld when he was talking about the conditions for war and how do you anticipate terrorist activity, that you know things that you don't realize you know. In the school environment, we know some things that we don't realize that we know. And one way to get at that is to say that sometimes the problem, the way we see the problem, is the obstacle to its solution. And in this context, the obstacle is that we assume now, because of the way this evolved, that it's the job of a school, with some help from the government, to feed our kids. If we didn't have that frame around the problem, could we find a different solution to doing it? And the answer is yes. And before I tell you what it is, I want to show you another example. So this is a man in the city of Mumbai in India. It's the 6th largest city in the world and has something like 19 million people. And within that population, there are hundreds of thousands of office workers who are lower income than the average American office worker, and they expect a hot meal every day. The offices don't provide any solution to that. The government doesn't provide any solution to that. So the free market has evolved a fascinating solution. Has anybody seen the movie Lunchbox? Yeah, a couple hands. Really cute little romantic comedy made in India about this very phenomenon. This is a tiffin dabawala, a delivery man who delivers tiffins, or these metal tins. Women generally make hot lunches for their husbands in the mornings. These drivers, who are essentially mostly illiterate, pick them up at the office workers' homes mid-morning and deliver them to their offices. It's an incredibly intricate system. It was profiled in a Harvard Business Review case study as incredibly accurate, even though most of them can't read. A very elaborate system of logistics to get the meals that office workers want to them that doesn't involve the government and doesn't involve the companies they work for. It's a fascinating solution. So given that, we don't have in the United States hundreds of thousands of office workers that can't afford an alternative solution. We don't have 5,000 illiterate delivery people that might want to do this. But we have some assets in our society that might help us come at the school lunch program in a completely different way. So I'm going to give you a recipe that we've used to stir up a new solution for lunches, and it has 4 important components, and then it has a new way of putting them together. So the first component, I hope I've convinced you already, is we need a lot of variety in school lunches because of allergies, because of dietary preferences. And we, as consumers now, expect very rich, deep choice from Netflix and from Amazon. So we need an online world in which we can choose things with rich variety. And because we care about the quality of food more than we used to, my mother certainly didn't care much about the quality of anything that I ate at lunch. She just cared that I ate lunch. We need something like the FDA that has nutrition standards. And we have software now that can take a recipe and spit out a label that looks just like this to tell us exactly what the food quality is. Here's a really interesting ingredient. In the United States today, there are 10,000 local professional caterers. They are licensed, they are insured. Their reputation depends on making fabulous food. Otherwise, who wants to use them for a wedding or a bar mitzvah? They're locally known in their communities. They're near the schools our children go to. They would love to serve those schools if there was a good way to do it. We also have people that are looking for part-time hours, frequently called mother's hours, that have minivans that would love to have a few hours of work in the morning before they pick their children up from half-day kindergarten. So if you took online deep choice commerce, if you took professional caterers, if you took minivans and part-time workers and good nutritional information, and if you put that together in what we call in the 21st century sort of an online marketplace model, business models that you see with Airbnb and Lyft and TaskRabbit and Loose Cubes and Uber and God knows how many that I've overlooked, businesses that are focused on helping people aggregate fragmented demand and fragmented supply and have those two meet each other efficiently, you can create a different way to solve lunch. And that's what we've done. We have at Smart Lunches a virtual lunch service, at least that's what I call it, where there's an intermediary, that would be us, working with the school and with parents and with caterers directly. The way it works is that we set up a lunch menu by school so that we can adapt to the school's preferences around food. No meat on Fridays in Lent or kosher or halal meats. We let the parents buy lunches from us directly so that the school doesn't have to be in the middle of that equation. We have caterers prepare the food and fulfill the orders, and then we run the delivery service that brings the food fresh to the school every day. A very different approach that comes from relaxing the assumption that the school has to do it. And the result of that is that the school doesn't have to be in the middle of the supply equation. So what happens when you take a different approach to looking at the problem and ask yourself what obstacles are in the way to how we see a solution? Kids can eat better because we can offer 10 or 12 choices a day, including all the things that meet the dietary restrictions and preferences that children have today, with food quality that parents want to see. Parents sleep better because they know their kids are eating something that meets the quality expectations and the safety requirements they have. Schools can teach better because we're freeing the school from having to worry about lunch, which is frequently a loss-making activity in their budgets. We take that off their plate, pun intended, and let them focus on what they do. And I would argue that society just works better because we're not creating new capacity, we're leveraging existing local businesses and helping them put what they have to work on behalf of schools and students. So the result is, I think, that we can go from this to something that looks like this, and I hope you agree that's a bold solution. Thanks very much.